High Salt Diet Q&A. So as a follow-up to our last two long-form videos on the negative effects of chronic high sodium intake, we decided to take some questions from viewers via the community tab. So today we'll cover, does the type of salt matter? How much salt should we eat? Is low carb an exception? Why do I feel better when I eat salt if it's bad for me? And are there ways to counteract a higher salt intake if you need to consume it to increase your blood pressure? For example, if you get orthostatic hypotension or you just enjoy the taste of salt. Now, if you didn't catch the initial videos, you can access them via the description of this video. Note before we get started, none of this is medical advice and you should consult your healthcare provider before making any changes. So to begin with, let's talk about the type of salt. Does the type of salt matter? And this was something that was brought up quite a bit. Hey, clearly Morton's table salt, regular old Morton's iodized salt, is completely different from natural forms of salt, which are more healthy. Things such as Celtic sea salt, pink Himalayan salt, Redmond's real salt, and things of that nature. Now, clearly there are differences between table salt and these less refined salts, particularly around the other minerals found in them. That being said, this has nothing to do with the points addressed in our previous videos. The point is the body stores excess sodium in our skin, muscles, cartilage, bone, and the glycocalyx that lines our blood vessels, and over the long term, this seems to be bad for our health. Whether that sodium comes from Morton's table salt or Redmond's real salt is totally irrelevant. Next, how much sodium do we need? What's ideal? Based on the research we have to date, the minimum amount of sodium we need to eat per day to compensate for losses is 500 milligrams. Keep in mind, in those who perform a lot of exercise, particularly in the heat, this may increase due to losses in sweat. In terms of what is ideal, based on the research, it seems 800 milligrams per day is the perfect number to shoot for. Though it's important to point out that the recommendation is still currently 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day, keeping in mind that most people are eating around 3,400 milligrams per day. If you can get anywhere near that 1,500 milligram per day marker, that is actually quite an accomplishment. As somebody who's attempted this, 800 milligrams, particularly for somebody who enjoys food, especially salty foods, is going to be very, very difficult. Do low carbers need to worry about their salt? Is low carb an exception? There does seem to be evidence that a low carb diet leads to sodium and water losses in urine, particularly in the beginning phase. This is often attributed to lower insulin levels, leading to something called natriuresis. What's pretty interesting about this is that we see the same thing in fasting despite no sodium intake. So theoretically, this is likely due to the liberation of tissue sodium stores. Ultimately, this would be a net benefit of keto. However, this does not prevent the negative effects of putting a ton of salt through the gut, which has been shown to damage the stomach and disrupt the microbiome. Furthermore, putting excess salt through the kidney and into the urine can disrupt the urinary microbiome, increase stone formation, and promote urinary tract infections by impairing the immune system in the urinary tract. So overall, if you're low carb, I probably wouldn't consume a ton of salt as it's not an exception. But will you likely store less sodium compared to eating a heavily processed junk food diet? Absolutely. If it's bad for me, why does eating more salt feel good? Truthfully, we really don't know, but at the same time, there's no evidence that the reason you feel better is because your serum sodium levels were too low. In fact, a low salt diet may make you feel icky because you're liberating tissue sodium stores. During a low sodium diet, it's actually immune cells known as macrophages that liberate sodium from your tissues. This may explain the keto flu as well as why people on a prolonged fast feel better with electrolytes. Another potential reason is that you store sodium in a layer lining your blood vessels known as the glycocalyx. Overloading the system can cause your blood vessels to constrict, which will make you feel much better if you trend towards lower blood pressure overall. But over time, this likely leads to the accumulation of plaques in your blood vessel walls that are the hallmark of cardiovascular disease. So while you may feel good in the short term, that does not mean that this is good for you or your tissues long term. Are there ways to prevent the negative effects of a high salt diet? Most certainly. Exercise that causes you to sweat will lead to sodium losses from the skin, which is a primary storage organ. In the same way, using a sauna or steam room works via the same mechanism. Next, higher calcium intake has been shown to increase urinary sodium, which basically means you're probably excreting more of it, as does high potassium intake. Just a note there, this can be problematic in people who have a tendency towards stone formation, especially if they're continuing on the high salt diet. Granted, most people need to eat more calcium and more potassium, but if you're also going to consume high salt at the same time, this is something you're going to want to think about. Clearly, increasing your water intake will help you urinate more, which will also help you remove the excess sodium. A prolonged fast for 3 to 4 days without the electrolyte powders would be a very effective way to hedge against a higher sodium diet. Finally, either a short or long-term ketogenic diet may help you dump excess sodium out of your tissues, again, provided you're not oversalting your food, eating a ton of sodium, or taking electrolyte powders. Keep in mind that none of these approaches will prevent the negative effects to the gut, and that's not an insignificant problem. So that about does it. If you have questions of your own that you would like to ask about this topic or any other topics, we're going to be using the community feed to do that. In order to do that, you have to subscribe to the channel, and you'll be able to access the community feed where we're dropping polls and we're asking things such as this. Do you have any questions about the previous videos? Thank you all for listening. If you like this, give it the thumbs up. And if you feel that it will help some of your friends, please share. Take care.